Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing the much requested BrickLink API video. So, what is the BrickLink API? The BrickLink API is a application programming interface. Or, in easier terms, the API allows you to access BrickLink's site and your store using a programming language or a separate program of your own. You see a lot of this with programs like BrickFreedom, BrickSync, BrickPacker, a lot of things like that use BrickLink's API to access your inventory and give you data based on that. So we're going to be starting off with just making a quick program that downloads all of our inventory onto a CSV file on our computer. For that, we're going to need a programming language. Now, there are many programming languages that you can choose, most of them being able to access APIs in some form or another. Personally, I choose Node.js because it is what I am most comfortable in. And for this tutorial, we will be using Node.js. Node.js is a version of JavaScript that runs on your computer. So what we'll just need to do is just download Node.js. The other thing we're going to be needing is an IDE, or an integrated development environment. And this is what lets us actually build our code and be able to visualize and run our code. My personal recommendation for this is Visual Studio Code. This is a program made by Microsoft that is amazingly lightweight and just a all-around wonderful program, and I highly recommend it for any programming use for any language. So we're going to go ahead and click download on that as well. So from there, now that everything's down there downloading, where do we go from here? And the first thing we want to do is we want to go to BrickLink v2 API register consumer page. You can also find this by clicking on this link here from the BrickLink API page. Once we're here, you'll see a lot of things. You'll see the user information up top. This user information has your seller name, your store name, your consumer key, and your consumer secret. Now, what are these? Basically, these are your very custom and unique IDs for your store. Both of these are not our consumer secrets or consumer keys, of course. These are just random numbers and letters that I typed in so you guys couldn't see those and I had to do less blurring in post. Beyond that, you'll see the access tokens. And the access tokens are something you've probably used before if you've used anything like BrickSync or even the new BrickFreedom. Now, these access tokens are added down at the bottom here in the add access. You'll add your IP address and an IP mask. Most of the time, just 0 for all of them is perfectly alright, but if you do know your IP address, you can go ahead and type your IP address in and leave the default mask. After you've clicked add down here at the bottom, you'll see a new table pop up here in the access token section, which will have your token value and your token secret, as well as the allowed IP and the allowed IP mask. Now, like I said above, none of these are our actual token values or token secrets. All of these are random. Now that you have those, we need to save those for later. So keep this page open, keep it to the side, because we will need all 4 of these to access our API. What you can also find on this BrickLink API page is the Store API manual. By clicking on this link, it'll open a page that looks like this, and this is going to basically give you all of the references for what you can access from the API. You can go through anything from orders, to your inventory, to specific items, even feedback, color, category, and notifications. The API lets you access all of this stuff, and by clicking on each of these things, you can read through how you can access them and what they return. We'll be going over all of that, so don't worry if you're confused. I'll explain how all of this works. But what we're going to need to get started with first is installing the 2 programs we've downloaded. And by that, we'll go ahead and click down on Downloads, open the Node installer. This will just walk you through installing, so I'm going to go ahead and install it real quick. Now we have Visual Studio Code. What I like to do is I like to make it full screen, just so I have the most space possible. Now this is the welcome screen to Visual Studio Code. You can go ahead and play around with Visual Studio Code if you like. Like I said, it is a really, really great resource and is available on all operating systems, and I highly recommend it for doing any sort of programming. So what we're going to do to start out, after we've made our API keys, we're going to go ahead and create a new folder on our desktop. which you can see I have already done. And within this folder, we're just going to make an empty folder. Now that we have that folder created, we're going to go back into Visual Studio Code and open that folder in Visual Studio Code. So we're just going to go ahead and go to Desktop, BrickLink API, Tutorial 1, Open. And as you can see, we now have a empty, still the welcome message, and an empty Explorer over here. And the first thing we're going to do is go up to Terminal, New Terminal. And as you can see down here, this has created a terminal that we can now run things in. This is just like opening a new terminal like this, but this is just inside Visual Studio Code for convenience. And the first thing we're going to do here is, now that we have Node.js, we're going to set up our folder to run Node.js. And to do that, we type npm init. So there's npm init, I-N-I-T, and hit enter. It'll take a quick second, and you'll see some text pop up. So what this is doing is creating a file, or a package.json, that allows Node.js to understand that right here we are starting a Node.js terminal. So our package name, we can name this anything I want. I'm going to leave it tutorial 1 as the default, so I'm going to hit enter. Version, I'll leave it default, so hit enter. Description, YouTube tutorial for BrickLink API. Go ahead and hit enter. Entry point, we're going to leave default. That's going to be index.js. Test command, we don't need one. Get repository, we don't have one. Keywords, we don't need one. Author, go ahead and type your name. License, leave default. And after that, you'll see it read out what everything is going to say for you. So your name, tutorial 1, which is what you set up top here. Description and version, which you also set up top. And everything else you set up top. It's going to say, is this okay? You're going to click enter for yes. And now you can see over in the Explorer here, it has created a package.json. You can go ahead and open this package.json, and you'll see that it has everything that it read out in that terminal down here at the bottom as well. So just like that, we've already started our new coding project, and from there, we can start installing our packages or node modules. Now in order to do that, we're going to open back up our terminal again, and from here we're going to use npm, which is node package manager, to install our new packages that we're going to use to build our program. The first thing we're going to need to install is we're going to type npm install, and the first thing we need is Oauth. Now what is Oauth? Oauth is an internet protocol that allows us to interact with BrickLink securely. This is something that BrickLink implemented, and they require for us to use our consumer key, our consumer secret, our token value, and our token secret. And we send all of this securely through Oauth to be processed by BrickLink and sent all the data sent back to us. So just typing npm install Oauth and hitting enter, you'll see it go through a little animation kind of thing there in the console, and you can see right there, it has installed it. Now we have access to Oauth. You'll also see over in the Explorer, it has created a node_modules folder and a packagelock.json file. And the last thing we're going to need is something called JSON to CSV. So doing the same thing, npm install, and just typing JSON, the number 2, CSV. Now this is something I'll go over in a little bit, but this is basically converting JSON to a CSV file for us to access later. So we're just going to go ahead and hit enter on this as well. You can watch that install and see that that installed in about 1.246 seconds. From here, we've done everything we need to do for installing, and we can begin actually coding. In order to start with that, we can minimize our terminal. Going over here to the File Explorer, we can create a new file. In order to create a new file, you can click the button here that has a little file icon with the plus. Clicking that will create a new file in our folder, which we're going to call index.js. Now, if you remember in our initialization, in our package.json here, we set our main script here to index.js. So that is what we are calling our only script. So we can open up index.js and this is now a blank canvas for us to code. And to start with that, we need to import the two modules that we installed. In order to do that, we're going to create variables or constants. We're going to type const, and we're going to call this one Oauth. So const Oauth equals require, and Visual Studio Code has a lot of recommendations of what it thinks you're typing, so we can use that to our advantage to type or code faster. So we're using the require, open parentheses, open quotes, and as you can see, it now lists all of the things that we can put or require from our node modules. And we will require, and right now we're requiring Oauth, so we type in Oauth. You see it'll come up. Close it off with a semicolon to say that you're done with that line of code. And now you can see we have our constant Oauth equals require Oauth. So this is how we import things into Node.js to use later down in our code. We're going to do the same with JSON to CSV. We're just going to do this one just a little different, and I'll show you how. For this one, we're going to be using a function that they provide within their package. So in order to do that, instead of creating a custom named constant like we have with Oauth, we're going to open curly brackets, type parser, and close curly brackets. After that, we go equals require, and we're going to type JSON to CSV. Now, as you can see, our constant name that is within the curly brackets was switched to green, meaning that we imported a custom function that they have in their module. And we know we did that correctly because it is green. Now, we've imported both of our packages that we installed. We can go ahead and save. And from here, we will import one last thing. This is not a package we installed, but this is a package that comes default with Node.js. So we'll type const fs for file system. Now what our file system is allowing us to do is access all of our files on our computer. And this is what will let us save our CSV file to open later in other programs. So const fs equals require fs. And there we go. We've imported our file system. Now that you've imported all of your modules, we can use all of these variables that we created the names and use them to start accessing BrickLink's API. Now that we're ready to begin coding, as you can see, I did install one other package. This is a credentials manager that I use and is a personal preference. This also allows me to type in my credentials without them being publicly visible. This is not required, and I will show you where to input your own credentials as a string rather than using this manager as I did. Next, we're going to declare Oauth. And what does that mean? What did I just say? We're basically going to set up Oauth to send to BrickLink's API so that we know, or send our consumer secret and our consumer key to BrickLink's API so that it knows it's us. And how do we do that? We're going to create another variable, so var. We'll call this one Oauth lowercase, just for ease. We're going to type equals new Oauth dot Oauth. Now that can be a little confusing. It's something that the author of this chose to do and can be a little confusing sometimes, but basically just know that we're using Oauth to create a new request to BrickLink. Now, you can see this little suggestion that Visual Studio makes, and this is suggesting what we insert into these parentheses that we just opened. Now, BrickLink we don't actually use a request URL for BrickLink, so we just go ahead and can leave that blank. We also don't need an access URL, so we can go ahead and leave that blank. And now we have two blank strings there with commas after them. Now here, as you can see in the suggestion, it needs our consumer key. Now what you would normally do is you would open up single quotes like this, type in your consumer key, we'll just call it that. It's not spelled correctly, but that's okay. And that would be where your consumer key that you've copied from this web page here would go. So you can go ahead and copy your consumer key, and then you would paste it right here. Now obviously that's not my consumer key, and I am using a credentials manager, so I will be doing this slightly differently. Now next you can see it needs our consumer secret. So in the same way that we did the consumer key, you would open a string, copy your consumer secret, paste it here, and now you have your consumer secret in there. Now there we go. We have both of our consumer key and consumer token within our new Oauth. Now there are a few other things that Oauth does need, and we need to set these specifically that BrickLink can recognize them. As you can see, it needs a version number of which Oauth we're using. We're using version number 1.0. Now, where you find all this information is if you go to the API references, and you can go to authentication and authorization. Clicking this link will show you everything you need to set up. So the Oauth version must be 1.0. The consumer key is your consumer key. The Oauth token is your access token. And from all of the way there, you can go to the signature method and all of that, which we'll be going over now. Just know that this is all in authentication and authorization within the BrickLink API reference. So we've set the version to 1.0. From there, it wants the callback string. For this, we don't actually need anything, so we're going to set it to null. Null is a variable within Node.js that means nothing. It is empty, nothing exists there. You can tell that it's a slightly different blue in Visual Studio Code, meaning that it is a default variable. From there, we need our signature method, which you just saw in authorization authentication, needs to be HMAC-SHA1. Now this is the signature method that BrickLink requires. We don't need to really know what this is, but know that it is a hashing method that is used for security while sending things over the web. So we can go ahead and close this with a semicolon like everything else to know that we have now set up Oauth to be used to access our BrickLink store. So let's just get right to it. We'll go ahead and type Oauth, lowercase, because this is, as you can tell, this is where we set it up. So we need the lowercase Oauth, .get, open parentheses, and here we're going to type in our URL of what we want to get. So where do you get this URL? Again, this is going to be in the BrickLink API reference. You can go ahead and head into General Notes, and you can see the API base URL. So what this is the URL that we send information to our consumer key, our consumer secret, our token value, and our token secret that we can get data back from BrickLink. So we're going to go ahead and copy this default base URL and paste it right in here. Now, how do we tell it where to go? So from here, we want to access our inventory. So we're going to scroll down to user inventory, which is right here, and we're going to click get inventories. This is the method that we want to call to access all of our inventories. And as you can see right here, the method we're using is get, which stands for oauth.get, and the URI that we are using is /inventories. Now what does that mean? What do I do with this? We're going to go ahead and copy this. We're going to take our base URL here. We're going to add a / and type /inventories. This is telling Oauth that the link we are accessing is /inventories from the base link of api.bricklink/api/store/v1. Now, that can still be a little confusing, but just know that every method here will have a URI that you can access the rest of your data with, and it will always say at the above what URI you need. All of them are slightly different, so be sure you are using the correct one for the API call you are making. We are making an inventories call, so that is, we are using /inventories. Now that we have our URL set up to where we want to access, we're going to be passing in our token value and token secret. Much like our consumer key and consumer secret, we're going to be opening a string and going to our API consumer registration, copying the consumer token value here, and pasting it within this string. Now once again, I'm going to be using a credential manager, so it will look slightly different. Next, we need our token secret. So much in the same way, we're going to open a string, go here to our token secret, copy our token secret, and paste it within here. And now, after both those strings are pasted in, we will have our token value and token secret. So, now that we've passed in the URL we will be using to access BrickLink, the token value, and the token secret, we need to take all of the information it's going to send back to us and do something with it. And what we'll be doing is creating a function which has a response of error, the data it's sending back, and the response. Much of this you don't need to know. I'll explain all of it in a second. But we're going to go ahead and open this function with a curly bracket, hit enter just to give us a little more room, and from here we can now take all of this data that we're being sent back and do something with it. So we're going to go ahead and say if there's an error, we're going to go ahead and log the error in the console. So to do that, we just type if open parentheses error, console.error, error. So that's taking this function up here. If it sends us error and error exists, we're going to send a response in the console that reads what it sent us. Now that's just a safety thing. We don't actually have to type that or ever use error. It's just useful to know if an error is thrown, what is being said. But from here, let's just go ahead and log our data. So we'll print our data to the console. So we'll type console.log data. So this is the data that is sent to us from BrickLink. And we'll just go ahead and log that in the terminal. So we've been doing a lot of coding. Let's see what happens when we are to actually run our program. So let's view what is being sent to us. So we're going to go ahead down to our terminal, make it full screen once again. If your terminal is too full, you can type clear, and that will clear all the information out of it. And the first thing we're going to do is type node index.js. Now this is telling Node.js to run the file index.js. And if you remember, index.js is where we've added all of our code. So if we go ahead and click enter, you see that it will call BrickLink and just send us a whole bunch of data back. Now, what is this data? What is this just massive amounts of data scrolling by right now? All of this is actually all of the information on our inventory. But this is, as you see, kind of a bad way to view it. It's just kind of everywhere, extremely hard to read, a lot of things we don't understand what they mean, and it just keeps going on and on and on forever. Now eventually when it ends here, you'll see down at the bottom that it just opens back up our folder and we can type again, like so. We could rerun our program by typing node index.js, but we don't want all of this data again. You can actually see things in here. If you really look, you'll see name, 1x4x2 panel with side supports, hollow studs, closed smile pattern, a lot of things, but it's just extremely hard to read. So that's what we're going to change. We're going to go ahead and minimize our terminal first by typing clear, because there's a lot of information in there we don't need. And you can see that we just logged the data to the console. Now that's not what we want to do. We want to save a CSV to our computer that we can open and view easier. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing we need to do is, if you notice the name of the thing we imported, JSON to CSV. So first, we need to convert all of this data we just received into JSON format. And it is already in JSON format, but it's really hard to read, as you can see. So what we're first going to do is we're going to add a new line here. We're going to create a new variable called object, or obj. And we're going to set that equal to JSON in all caps dot parse data. Now what is this doing? This is setting a variable to our, this is taking our data, parsing it through JSON, and making it much easier for us to read. So now if we were to console.log object.data, if you go ahead and down to our terminal and run this node index.js and hit enter, you can see all of that random data that we saw last time is in much more organized of a view now. You can see that we can view each item separately if we were to look at it, see the inventory ID, its item number, the item name, the item part, and a whole other load of information. But you can also notice, if you notice down at the bottom, with a ellipses 2934 more items. Now this isn't very useful to us either. We can now read all of this information easier and understand the separation between parts, but as you can tell that our console just doesn't give us enough information. So now we need to convert this into a file that we can open on our computer. To do this, we'll once again clear our terminal, minimize it, and we're going to create a new function. So after line 14 at the moment, we're going to hit enter twice and type function toCSV. That's just what we'll call our function. We'll call it toCSV. Within this function, we're going to need to send it data. We're going to go ahead and open our function like we did above, hit enter, and give us room to code. So what are we going to do in here? We're now going to use our JSON to CSV to convert all of this JSON data you just saw in the console to a CSV file. And how do we do that? First, we're going to type const, so we're creating a new variable, JSON to CSV is equal to a new parser. Now if you remember, parser is the function we imported up on line 2. This is the function built into json.csv that allows us to parse our data. We can go ahead and finish that line with an open and close parentheses and a semicolon. And now we've created a variable that creates a new parser. This is just going to parse all of the JSON data and make it easier for it itself to convert to a CSV. After that, we need to convert it to CSV. So we're going to create another constant, call it CSV. We're going to set that equal to our above constant, JSON to CSV, dot parse. Now we are now using the parser to parse some data. So we'll open that and type data. What is this line doing? We're now using our parser to parse the data we send this function. Now, we can then change our console.log up here on line 13 to CSV. So now we're sending all of that information you saw in the console, we're sending that to this function. We're taking this function and parsing it through our parser from JSON to CSV. And this is creating a CSV file. Now how do we save this file? To save this file, we use our file system, or FS. So we'll go ahead and type fs dot write file sync. What is this doing? This is writing a file. So we're going to need to give it a path. We'll just give it a name of the thing. So we'll call this inventory.csv. And that's going to save a file called inventory.csv into our main folder where index.js and all of everything else is. Now we also need to give this the data, which is going to be saved within this file. So we'll add a comma and type CSV, because that is the function that we called up here, or the variable we created up here on line 18. So what this is doing is it's taking file system, writing a file called inventory.csv with the data of the variable CSV. Now, we can now go back to our terminal, run node index.js, which again is telling Node.js to run the file index.js, which is where all of our code is. If we go ahead and hit enter, you'll see it'll take a second and nothing will print out to the console. That's good. We didn't tell anything to print out to the console, but if you notice in our file explorer to the left, a new file was created called inventory.csv, which means that what we did was correct. If we go ahead and go into our Finder and open up inventory.csv, it'll go ahead and open in numbers. Numbers will process it for a second just to make it organized and format it nicely for us to view. And as you can see, all of that data that we once saw in our console is now in a nice spreadsheet for us to view. You can see the inventory ID, the item, the color ID, color name, and all of the other information nicely laid out in a spreadsheet for us to read. And you can go through every item in your inventory and see all the information about it. So From that, we have actually successfully downloaded all of our inventory from BrickLink into a CSV file saved on our desktop or in our folder. And we can open it with any viewing program like Numbers or Excel and see all of this wonderful information that we have created. Now, a couple things in here can be a little confusing. The item you can see is just a kind of bracket of a couple different things, and sometimes that can be hard to read. Now we can fix that actually. If we go ahead into our right up here, up top on line 6, after that we can create a new variable, const, called fields. And what are we going to do with fields? Fields, we can now choose which fields from BrickLink or from our JSON data that we want to export to our CSV. So let's say that we want to take all of this data and only get the item name and the item color, just for example. So you can go ahead and type item.name, because if you remember, in our inventory CSV, the title of the line up here is item. So we're calling item. And then we also want the name variable just from here, so we don't have this whole line of things. So we're going to put a dot name. So this will just export our item.name. For example, this top one would be flag 2x2 square. Now if we also just want the color, you can type comma, open string, and we will call this color underscore name. This gets the name. If we once again open our inventory CSV, you can see on our first one, for example, which was flag 2x2 square, the color name was yellow. So we ask for color underscore name. Now what we now do with this fields variable that we've created is on line 18 in our parser, we want to tell it that we only want it to parse everything that we have listed in fields. And to do that, we open curly bracket, type in our variable name, which we set on line 7, which we called fields, close curly bracket, and close again. Now, when we run, go into our terminal, go ahead and clear it, run node index.js, it once again will not say anything in the console, but it has overrode our inventory.csv. We can go ahead and open that once again. Once it opens, you can now see the only thing we have in here is item.name, which is flag 2x2 square, and color name, yellow. Now, this CSV isn't super useful to us because it doesn't give us quite enough information. And there's a couple ugly things up at the top here, like color underscore name and item.name. So let's fix that. We're going to use the same fields variable up here, but we're going to change it just slightly. So we still want item.name, but we want to give this a different label. So it doesn't say item.name, and we can just say item name. So we're going to go into our field. We're just going to go ahead and delete these two things that we needed, and we're going to open a curly bracket. Now, much like our functions, we're just going to hit enter to give ourselves a little bit more room here. And from here, we're going to give each of our fields a label. So we'll type label, add a colon, and we'll call this one item name. Add a comma, and we also need the value. So you type value, colon, and if you remember, our item name was listed under item.name. So now our item.name column will be labeled item name, which is just more convenient to the eye and makes it easier to understand. But now, if we also want the color to be called something, we can go down to line 10, add a comma after the curly bracket, open a new curly bracket, hit enter for more room, and do the same again. Type label. We will label this color, add a comma, add the value, which remember was color underscore name. And from there, our color underscore name field in our inventory CSV will now be called color with a U. So if we were to now run this again, so we'll go down to our terminal, we'll go ahead and clear it, type node index.js, run it. Nothing's printed to the console, but our CSV has been overridden. We can go ahead and open our CSV. And now you'll see that the two columns have our custom names on them, which is much more easy and convenient for us to read. So you can see this one is called item name, and it pulled everything from item.name. And you can see this one is called color, and it pulled everything from color underscore name. Now, that is the basics of downloading your inventory to a CSV to make it much easier to read within a spreadsheet program like Excel or Numbers. Like I showed you, all of these fields, there are a lot of fields that are sent. If you remember from our first CSV file, there are a lot of information that you can obtain from just the inventory. I'll also leave in this file a list of all of the inventory values that you can use to print out to a CSV. And I also leave all of this code in the description in a GitHub link. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the Discord, which is linked in the description as well, or in the comments below, and we'll help you out as best as possible. This is really useful as a really useful beginning steps to learning how the BrickLink API can help you. And this just allows us to take all of our inventory and download it into a very easily readable format. Hopefully that helped you guys out a lot, and I look forward to helping you guys more with the API tutorials in the future. Let me know if you have any suggestions for other things you'd like to see in these API tutorials in the comments below, and we'll be sure to check that out. So thank you very much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.